Hello, this week I'm going to take a look at a Sherman Tank wreck from Anyscale Models. You may recall me opening this in an unboxing because it was my first order from Anyscale. So what I've started by doing, I'm going to look at the Sherman Tank wreck, and I've started by giving it a really good wash to get off anything that, the release agents and things that might affect the paintwork. And then what I've been doing is I've been trimming off any of the really unsightly flash that's on there, or bits that, just look out of place. I mean, there is still some on there, but a lot of that is going to be covered up with the surrounding scenery, mud, stuff like that. But I have took off anything that's too obviously out of place. And the same on the turret as well. And so, like, the next stage now that I've prepared it is I'm going to be giving it a prime coat in army green, which is like olive colour, and then I'll slowly build it up from there. But I'm going to start that before I actually think about the base that I'm going to put it on, because obviously the drying time that's involved. So I'll take this away now and I'll bring it back when it's primed. Right, I've brought it back. It's been primed, and I've just started touching up what's left of the tracks on this first side and muddying it up a little bit. I'm going to do a bit of weathering on it first of all. Then I'm going to look to see if there's anything I want to add to it, which is not the normal way round, but it's the way I'm going to go with this one. Because what I want to do is I want to get it to an almost a finished state, as if it was being done as a complete model, but then reattack it to actually add the actual damage and the rust and everything else on it. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a very, very light dry brush to pick out some of the details, and then I'll bring you back and we'll have a look at what other things I can add to it before applying an all over wash, and then I'll be adding the transfers before I start the main rust effects and damage effects. So, right, I'll be back in a second. Right, before I go any further with it, I've just found myself a piece of board that I'm going to mount the scene on. And what this is a piece of sign writer's plastic board. It cuts quite easy. As you can see, I've trimmed the edges. I'll probably sand them down a little bit as well, just to make them a bit smoother. But it's fairly strong. It has got some flexibility, but it won't bow. So I think this would be a good thing to put it on, and it was a bit of an offcut anyway. So, and then what I'm going to use, I've made up some of my own, I don't know what you call it now, Sculpt Mold mold. And basically what it is, it's grated and then dried out toilet paper, put it wet, made it wet, and then put it in a blender. I think I got the, originally when I did it, I got the idea off one of Luke's videos, because he did some brilliant videos for people like me that were just setting out. And basically what it was is a load of toilet rolls. You wet it, put it in a blender, blend it out, get it as fine as you can, and then you squeeze all the moisture out of it and let it dry. And then you mix in some plaster powder with it. Dry, leave it to dry out again, I think I did blend mine a bit more because I've got a lot of big bits in it, but it comes out pretty well. And I'm going to use that on here, but I'm going to Mod Podge it first, and then build it up around the actual model. Because what I'm thinking of initially is that the tank's come this way. It's been engaging with an enemy, say at this angle. It's obviously just turning its turret to fire back when it's been hit. So I'm seeing it as going up into like a muddy area, and it's on a bit of a tilt like that. So that's where I'm going to aim at trying to sit it down with. But I'll get my board smooth, and then I'll mix some of this up and bring you back. Right, I'm going to mix up this Sculpt Mold and put a little bit of it down first. I'll try and keep it. Everybody talks about the consistency of cottage cheese, or is about right for this stuff. I think the main trick is to just put the water in a little bit at a time. Take it slowly. Ideally I could have done with a bigger bowl than this, but starting to go right, a little bit more. Obviously the wetter it is, the just longer it'll take to dry out. I think that's about right. You have a look at that. You see, it's a bit like cottage cheese. Get this first bit nice and flat. Just find it best to actually just do a little bit at a time. You can always mix a bit more because it does tend to go off so quick. Obviously you can rub this down a bit if you want to. I'm not so bothered on this occasion because it's going to be mud, so just try this on it to see how I want it. That'll be about the right angle. So obviously I want to build a bit more. I'm going to mix a little bit more up for round here, and then as it comes away, zoom in a little bit. Yeah, so I'm just going to build up a little bit more around this side, but keep it fairly thin, and then mould out a bit of contour where it's obviously come up that way. and trying to bank to turn. Right, this is the bit I need to think about how it's got there. It's not going to have the tank tracks, but I just need to give it that crushed lower look than the rest of it. I can finish off the actual look of it with the mud and things that I add to it. I'm going to use a coffee stirrer to just start to put in some of the suggestions of the actual track. It doesn't have to be perfect. I can beef this up a bit when it comes to decorating it. It does stay fairly good for actually carving shapes into it for a while, but obviously, you know, you still need to be ironing out any obvious problems that you're not happy with fairly quick, because obviously as it gets harder you're going to need tools to start to smooth it out more. I'll just give you a little look at that before I carry on with it, but I think you can see the impressions of the tracks. They're not perfect, but like I say, I can build that up and make it look a little bit better as I carry on with the piece, but I just wanted to get that initial imprint in there. Right, I'll just finish up a few bits here and get my desk tidied up, and then we'll come back. Right, what I've done is I've based that now, it's dried, and I've started to give it an earth colour paint. And then what I've also done is, using some leftover bits, I've done a trailing track coming away from this one where it's lost its track, and a little bit at the front. Right, so what I've used is what's left over from another tank thing, and I've used bits of wire together with the eyelets to make up the cables for the tank. I'm going to make up the two, and then I'll undercoat them and then fit them to the tank and then paint them up afterwards. Right, I've managed to put that little cable together, and before I go much further, I've glued that in place on the tank. And what I'm doing is I'm using a model that I've got. I think this is a Warlord one that I've built prior to this as my, you know, guide for where to put things. So I've trailed the cable along there, and I've also used another bit of wire for the aerial because there wasn't one, obviously. And then the other thing that I've done, obviously I haven't got the MMG for the top, so I've managed to mackle one up out of a light machine gun and some sprue parts. I don't know whether you can see that. And then painted it up to look like it. And a little bit of wire to extend it because the light machine gun wasn't quite long enough. In fact, I think it had got an hand on it as well, so that cut the hand off. But it'll look the part when it's in place. And obviously there's all the weathering and the rusting and stuff to do yet, so there's a lot to cover up any shortfalls that it might have. Right, I'll put that in place and then I'm going to leave it then to dry for a little while before I attempt the next stages. Right, I could now go about applying the transfers to the tank now that it's all dried off. So I've brought out another little Sherman that I've done previously just to copy the sticker transfer, placements. And very similar procedure to all the others. I use a brush to gently lift out the transfers. Transfer them to the actual model. And then I use my green stuff. Brush to put it into place. I came across something the other day that said, I don't know whether you can see there, that's where the shell penetration is. But I came across something in one of my books that said that often the attacking German tank or artillery would use that as a sighting post and try and aim for that so they could get the centre part of the tank. Now I don't know whether that's true or not, but I could see how it could work. So I'm going to place this one here. I think this is probably I know that this is a resin mould, but whether it's a different version of the Sherman, I think it might be, because if you look, that piece is in a different place. And but I'm going to mount the star further back because I think that's where it would be. I haven't got the additional names that you can go for, so on this one, I think the only other one I've not used is Billy's Boys. I'm going to position that there. Like that. It's good to get these on now before I do any weathering or anything, because otherwise they'd look a little bit too bright. You can see that one on the back. was a bit tricky because the actual number came away from the transfer before I could get it on the tank. And there we go. That's that one. Right, so we just need the star on this side, followed by the name, and then the number again. Right, rather than subjecting you to any more of that, I've just finished off by putting the front star in place. And as you can see, we've got the number and the name, star on that side, and the same on that. Now it's looking more the part, but obviously this is a damaged tank. It needs to look a lot rougher than this, but I needed to start with that as a base. I'm going to let the transfers dry in place. I'll give them a little coat of matte varnish just to hold them down before I do any more weathering, and then I'll start applying the damage and the fire damage and the rust to it to make it look like it's been sat there for a while. So I'll set that to dry, and then I'll rejoin you when we're about to start that. Right, now this next bit, I've got to be honest, is a bit of an experiment. I have used obviously rust in weathering process before, and I've tended to use this weathering powder and a basic brown. But on this one, what I'm hoping to do is, where it's actually had the shell damage, where it's penetrated the hull of the tank, I want to use that as the radius area to show that it's gone in there, started a fire, part of the explosion, and as a consequence that's burnt out the top of the tank, and with it burning out, that it's lifted all the paint off, and because it's been there for a while it's starting to rust. Now it's a lot more complicated than anything I've done before, so this literally isn't so much a guide as an experiment. So I'm just going to be brave and give it a go and try and build it up in lots of different layers, but I can only work with what I've got. So I think what I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to give it an Army Painter strong tone wash in that particular area where I want the fire to have been, and then build it up in layers. So I'll add this and then I'll bring you along for the next bit. Right, so I've added the strong tone. As you can see, it's still wet, which is how I want it for this next stage. What I'm going to try and do, I'm using some of this weathering powder by Umbral, that's a basic rust colour. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a little bit of sponge, dab it in the powder, and then start to dab that in the area to let it mix in with that wash, and hopefully this will get a ground layer of rust where the paint burnt it off, where the fire's burnt off the paint. It's looking a bit orange at the minute, but I'm not going to worry about that because I'm going to take it back down with some of the brown as well. Take a bit down onto the other side as well. The flames have come out under the turret. So that's what it's starting to look like. As you can see, it looks really bright at the minute, but I am going to take that down. In fact, the first thing I'm going to use is this, which is Dark Earth Umbral weathering powder. And I'll just put a tiny bit of that on my tissue. Now I can use the same bit of sponge because I want to blend the two together anyway, so you can see that's starting to take it down a little bit now. Right, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to apply a little bit of Dry Rust by Army Painter. Now again, it's going to be a bit bright, but I'm not going to worry about that because we can take it down. Right, you can start to see how that's looking now. And then the next bit is, like whenever you look at a fire on something, if I pull that into sight, you've got like an edge of the burnt out ash coming along it. So I need to put that in and then blend it back in. Tempted to wait for this to dry, but thinking about it, I want it to blend back in, so I might just go straight on with that. And what I'm going to use is some of this Army Painter's Spaceship Exterior. I don't want it absolute bright white, but I'm going to blend a lot of it back in anyway, so, and I'll use this brush again for this as well. Just get a bit of this off. Right. I want this round the edge of the fire, so at the minute, I think you'll agree, it looks a bit too bright. But I'm now going to blend back from the rust into the white, and I'm going to use Necromancer Cloak. Sorry about that. There we go. And that's took it back down a lot now, look. I mean, I probably will do more, but I'm gonna give it a bit of drying time now, I think, before I do any more. Because then what we're going to need to do, I will highlight some with a bit more rust as well afterwards, but I'm going to give it time to dry, and then what I might do, you'll have to bear with me because I'm making this up as I go along. I'm going to add a little bit of the Umbral sand with the Umbral white, and kind of dust that on with a dry brush across the rest of it, around the rusted area, and then brush that. Once it's on it, I'll brush it down and get a lot of it back off, and then seal that in, and then, you know, we'll come back and have another look at the rust area and see if there's anything we can add to it. Right, so what I've done is I did what I said. I added some of the Umbral sand to the white and a spot of the dark earth as well, and blended that over the tank. And then what I've done is I've built up the rust a little bit more, and then using the spaceship exterior to take the cloud out of the smoke a bit further of the ash, and then blended that in with some of the Umbral smoke powder. I think it looks like a fairly extensive fire has lifted the paint off, and so the rust has got to work on it. So it's been there a little while, but not a long while, because you can still see the elements of the smoke. I mean, I could go more with it. I think if I add a few more weathering powders, I know you can get like a crusty type rust. I mean, I might be able to achieve some of that with the Umbral powder weathering thing, but I don't know. I might leave it at that, or I might just touch it up. But for now, I'm going to let it dry now, and I'll have another look at it, see if I need to add any more, and if not, I'll start working on the scenery. So I'll bring you back shortly. So what I'm going to do now, just before I leave it totally to dry, is I've added a little bit of Vallejo heavy mud into the tracks, along with the remnants of the smoky powder that I've mixed in with it, and a bit on the other side, not so much more on that. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the Vallejo Splashed Mud just to give a drier look to this main soil around it, and then I can leave it totally to dry. So I'm just going to apply some of that now. It's going to look a bit bright, but it'll dry darker, and I can add back to it anyway. Right, and with that, totally leave that to thoroughly dry out now before I do any more. So I'll bring you back soon. Right, now that I've given this the rust time to really dry down, and I've dusted up the tank a bit more and picked out a few more details, and I've added some of the mud So what I'm going to do now is, close to where the tank is, I'm going to add some soil and grit, which looks like this. And I'm just going to take that out for the first bit around it, because as I say, I want to grass round this as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to brush on some Mod Podge and then add some grit. That should be enough. Bring that a little bit close for you to have a look at. Right. I'm going to give that a bit of time to dry. Initially, I shall put some more glue on here when it's totally dried, and I will put some static grass. But then after I've given it a soak in some sealing PVA, I might actually add some flock grass as well, and then some tufts as well, just to break it up a bit. I'll bring you back when we get to that stage. Now that the tank rust is dried out and the ground's dried out, I'm going to do some static grass around the edge. I've tried to mask off the model a little bit as well, so we don't get it all over that. To remove this cover for this last bit to get it in. Right, now that the grass has dried, I'm going to start adding a few tufts just to, you know, brighten this one up a little bit more. I don't want to go too far with it. There's always a temptation with these things because I don't know, it just it enthuses you to carry on and add more and more bits, but I've found, you know, there reaches a point where you start to add the wrong thing and it suddenly runs away from you. So I think I'm going to keep this one fairly simple and just use up some of these odd tufts that I've got. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some of this fast drying basing glue. I know the tufts have got their own little adhesive, but I don't like to just trust to that. I want them to stay on there, so I always put a dab of this on the bottom of them as well. I'll start with one of these bigger ones first. That's like a heathery type thing, I think. Let's dab a bit of glue on the bottom of it. mustn't forget round the back as well. I think I'll add that one there. Probably put another one on them on as well. Perhaps have a little bank of it behind the tank. So just bring in something a little bit different. It's good that I'm finally using up all of these oddments that I've got as well. I'm going to need to top up my tough store soon, I think. Right, and I think I'm going to call that done. Like I say, you could carry on adding it. I mean, I could put a bush on there and all sorts. But the thing is, you get tempted to put everything that you can think of onto it, and then it starts to look a little bit too much. So, although I could add more, I think it's best this time that I leave this one alone. And yeah, that'll be the finished thing. All I need to do now, I won't bother putting that on camera, but is to seal it. So I'll be using some sealant to spray on all the grass around it as well. And then obviously I'll give the tank a matte varnish so I don't lose any of this through handling it. But I'll let that dry first and then finish it off. So here's a few photos of the finished tank. I hope you've enjoyed this and hope it's given you some inspiration to perhaps have a go at doing something similar for your own battlefield. If you have enjoyed it, please consider giving me a thumbs up or even subscribing so you hear when my next video comes out. Thanks again for watching. Bye.